A world before running water. The air tonight is quiet, still. Just you, your breath, and the soft hush of the world outside your window. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes soften. Because tonight we're going somewhere far away and yet not so long ago. A time before hot showers. Before indoor plumbing. Before toothpaste and shampoo and fluffy towels pulled warm from a dryer. We're stepping back into the streets of Victorian England. Now, take a deep breath in and let it go slowly, because the world we're entering is anything but clean. And yet, it's the one from which our modern hygiene, our very notions of cleanliness, were born. The Victorian era, stretching roughly from 1837 to 1901, was a time of contradictions. A time of great innovation and grimy realities. Of brilliant inventions and unspeakable stench. Horse-drawn carriages rolled past glittering ballrooms, and just down the alley, gutters ran thick with filth. It was a world where elegance met excrement, lace gloves, and chamber pots. We often picture the era in rose-colored tones, women in corsets, men in waistcoats, everyone sipping tea beneath gas lamps. But beneath those silks and starch, there was a much smellier truth. So tonight, we'll gently peel back the velvet curtain of history, not to judge, but to understand. Not to shudder, but to appreciate just how far we've come. Imagine waking up in a narrow bed, the mattress lumpy, the blanket scratchy. The sun filtering weakly through a soot-darkened window. You hear coughing, not your own, from the other side of the thin wall. Or maybe there's no wall at all, just a curtain. Just a shared space filled with the breath of your siblings, your parents, maybe even a lodger or two. One room for everything. Sleeping, eating, washing. The chamber pot under the bed still needs emptying. You hold your breath as you slide it carefully aside. You don't want to tip it. The floorboards are warped, and the stench is familiar. Too familiar. There's no bathroom to go to, no faucet to turn, no toilet to flush. Just a tin bowl on a wooden stand in the corner, and a chipped pitcher of water that's gone cold overnight. The water is clean, or clean enough. You dip a cloth into it and squeeze it out. Then dab your face, your hands, maybe your armpits. It's called a strip wash or a stand-up wash. You don't undress fully, it's too cold for that. You just wipe where you must. So, if you're lucky, if you can afford it. And even then, it's probably harsh and lye-based. It scrubs the dirt off, sure, but it also scrubs the skin raw. Your hair? You tied it up yesterday and the day before. You haven't brushed it yet today. The comb's teeth are missing, and it pulls too much. You'll manage. Maybe you'll get to wash it this weekend. Or the weekend after that. The clothes you pull on have been worn for several days. Maybe longer. You give them a shake and a sniff, but they go on either way. The blouse is stained, the hem is frayed, but that's fine. That's normal. Everyone's in the same boat. Now picture yourself upstairs, or perhaps you are the upstairs. A lady of the house. A gentleman. You have servants who take care of things. Laundry, the fire, the meals. They bring you a bowl of warm water in the morning. Not hot, not boiling, but pleasantly warm. You have a bit more privacy. A bit more distance from the worst smells of the house. Still, your copper bathtub must be filled by hand. Buckets carried from the kitchen. And emptied the same way. You don't bathe every day, no one does. Maybe once a week. Maybe less. You wear powder and perfume to mask the inescapable, the sweat, the oils, the grime. The average Victorian city dweller didn't smell good. But they didn't know that. Not really. When the whole world smells bad, your nose adjusts. And that's the thing. They weren't dirty by choice. They weren't lazy. They were doing their best with what they had, and what they had was limited. Imagine your city with no garbage trucks. No sewage system. No running water. Imagine the streets filled with horse dung, rotting food, dead rats. Children play beside puddles of unknown origin. You step carefully, but your shoes are never truly clean. And at the heart of it all is misunderstanding. People didn't know how disease spread. They didn't yet understand germs. They thought smells, miasmas, caused illness, that the stink itself was dangerous. So they burned incense, sprayed perfume, hung bunches of lavender in the windows. But they didn't wash the drains. They didn't disinfect the bedding. They didn't connect the dots between waste and water, between filth and fever. Still breathing gently? Let your mind wander through a Victorian kitchen. The table is worn smooth by elbows and time. A kettle hisses on the stove. Someone's slicing bread. It's a bit stale, but the crust is thick, and that's what matters. The butter is soft, a little too soft, but no one complains. Milk is poured into a ceramic jug. It's starting to turn, but sour milk is common. You can bake with it. No refrigerator hums in the corner. No plastic-wrapped freshness here. The meat is salted, or smoked, or drying on a hook by the hearth. Fruit, when you have it, is seasonal and spotted. Vegetables are stored in root cellars, or pickled, or simply wilted. Food safety is relative. Hunger overrides caution. And yet, life goes on. They fall in love. They marry. They laugh and grieve and sing lullabies beside smoky hearths. They decorate their homes with doilies and framed pictures, polish brass handles, dust the windowsills. They take pride in clean faces, polished boots, a freshly ironed collar. They define cleanliness not by our standards, but by theirs. Tonight, as you lie back in your clean bed, fresh sheets tucked beneath your chin, just imagine the softness of cotton once spun in Victorian mills. The quiet hum of pipes behind the walls, delivering water to your tap. The flush of the toilet in the next room. All of it, invisible, taken for granted, but hard-won. Because the Victorians, in all their mess and muddle, helped lay the groundwork for the world you live in now. A world of cleanliness, of convenience, of quiet comfort. And that is where our story begins. Tiny rooms and shared air. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. The year is 1854. The sun has barely risen over the skyline of London, and already the city breathes heavily beneath a blanket of smoke. Chimneys churn out soot, factory bells clang in the distance, and carts rattle past with iron wheels grinding against cobblestone. But we're not starting outside today. We're stepping inside, into a room no larger than your bathroom, maybe 10 feet by 12, where an entire family lives, sleeps, eats, and dreams. No separate bedrooms. No personal space. Just one single room where life happens from beginning to end. You can almost feel it, the heaviness in the air. The room is damp. Not just from a rainy morning, but permanently damp. The walls weep moisture down their cracked surfaces, and the plaster has peeled away in spots, revealing wooden beams beneath. In one corner, a strange green fungus creeps upward, ignored but ever-present. The ceiling is low. The window, small and clouded with grime. It opens only slightly, and even then, it's just a crack, not enough to let in much fresh air. Just enough for the chill to sneak through in winter and the stench to linger in summer. The air inside is thick. You breathe in and taste other people's lives, their sweat, their breath, their sleep. A mother stirs porridge at the hearth. A baby cries softly. A grandfather coughs from under a pile of blankets. This is home. If you're lucky, you have a straw mattress to sleep on. If not, maybe just a pile of rags. Children share beds, often 3 or 4 to a frame. Parents sleep sitting up sometimes, to save space. At night, snores mingle with the rustling of rats in the walls. Sometimes mice scurry across the floorboards. No one screams anymore. It's just part of life. There is no indoor plumbing. No running water. If you want water, you fetch it from the public pump at the end of the street, carrying buckets one by one. The water isn't always clean, but it's what you have. And when it's raining, the streets flood. Human waste, animal waste, everything runs downhill. Into the gutters, into the pumps. You try not to think about it. Behind a threadbare curtain lies a chamber pot, the only toilet in the home. Used by everyone. Emptied in the morning. Maybe, if someone remembers. If someone has the stomach. Often, it's a child's chore. They carry it through the alley, trying not to spill, and dump it into a shared privy, or, if there's no privy, just out into the street. Sometimes out the window. Yes, really. The term night soil comes into play here, a polite way of saying human excrement. Night soil men come after dark to collect the waste. Not for hygiene, but because it's too disgusting to do in daylight. They wear no masks, no gloves. Just thick boots and a tolerance forged by necessity. In summer, the smell is unbearable. In winter, it's merely foul. But always there. Let your shoulders relax. Let the thoughts settle gently. This wasn't rare. It was normal. In cities like London, Manchester, Liverpool, tens of thousands of people lived this way. Cramped. Pressed together like pages in a book no one wants to open. The poorer the neighborhood, the more people squeezed into one room. Lodgers were common, strangers who paid to sleep on the floor or in the same bed. Sometimes you'd share your home with 5, 6, or even 10 people who weren't family. People you hardly knew. And still, everyone tried to get along. Because what choice was there? Now shift your imagination to a lodging house, even worse. Here, multiple families share the same building, sometimes the same room. A single hearth. A shared chamber pot. Walls so thin you can hear every cough, every prayer, every fight. Privacy? It doesn't exist. Personal hygiene? Almost impossible. You might rinse your hands and face once a day, maybe. You wear the same clothes for days. And when your clothes are finally too dirty, you wait for laundry day. If there's enough water. If the weather allows. If the laundress is in a good mood. Until then, you cover the stains with an apron. You dab your neck with vinegar or lavender. You try to ignore the lice, the fleas, the ever-present itching. Maybe there's a powder for that. Or maybe you just endure. Even in these conditions, people find ways to care. To survive. A mother braids her daughter's hair each morning. A father polishes his boots with spit and elbow grease. A grandmother hums a lullaby while stirring soup, and children gather to warm their hands near the fire. They don't complain. Or rather, not more than necessary. This is life. It's hard, it's crowded, it smells, but it's familiar. And that familiarity brings a kind of comfort. Take a breath now. Let it ease in, then out. Because even in this cramped, unsanitary world, people fall in love. They write letters. They celebrate birthdays. They decorate with what little they have, a lace doily, a cracked teacup filled with dried flowers, a Bible passed down through generations. There's joy. There is dignity. Even in filth, there is humanity. But there are consequences too. Diseases spread quickly in crowded homes. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid, all thrive here. One sick person can infect an entire family. Sometimes entire streets. Doctors visit when it's already too late. Medicine is rudimentary. Prevention is misunderstood. Windows are kept closed to keep out bad air, but that traps the real danger inside. And so the cycle continues. Breathe in, breathe out. Cling to hope, because hope is all there is. The morning routine. Without a bathroom. You open your eyes slowly. It's still early. The light creeping in through the narrow window is pale and diffused, filtered through coal smoke and fog as always. The sun is up, but not enough to warm the room. The air is cold against your face, your breath a faint mist in the morning chill. You pull the blanket tighter, hoping for just a few more moments of stillness. But the day won't wait. The city outside is waking up, and so must you. There is no bathroom to walk into, no running tap, no shower humming in the next room. Just a chipped ceramic pitcher and a shallow tin basin on a rickety wooden stand. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake the others. In homes where entire families share one room, silence is a kindness. Movement is measured. You reach for the pitcher. The water inside is cold, icy even. It was poured last night from a pump at the end of the street, then left to sit. If it had been warm, it isn't now. Your fingers tremble slightly as you lift the pitcher and pour a small amount into the basin. The splash is louder than you expect. You dip the cloth in. It stiffens briefly in the water before becoming soft again. You squeeze it out. Then begin. You clean your face first. Eyes, cheeks. You wipe behind the ears. Then your armpits. Maybe your feet if they're especially grimy. This is a stand-up wash. Just enough to remove the worst of the sweat and city soot. You do not undress fully, not in this cold, not in this room. Just bits and pieces. Just what you must. So, sometimes, but not always. Soap is precious. Bought in small cakes and made to last. Too much and you'll run out before the next market day. And even when you do have soap, it's harsh. Caustic. It strips not only dirt but skin. So you learn to be careful. To use only enough. Your shoulders relax slightly with each stroke of the cloth. You imagine the wealthy, how they must bathe with warm water poured by servants. How their washcloths are soft, their towels thick, their rooms warm. But that is not your life. And imagining it too often makes you ache. So instead, you focus on the task. One part of your body at a time. Now your hair. There is no shampoo. No conditioner. Just a wide-toothed comb, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit of vinegar or egg yolk. Once a week, perhaps, you wash your hair with rainwater. The rest of the time, you tie it up. Pin it in place. Hide the grease beneath a bonnet or a scarf. And the clothes. You dress in the same garments you wore yesterday. And the day before. And maybe even the week before. You check the hems. Brush off the dust. Sniff under the arms. If it's not offensive, it will do. You smooth the fabric. Tug the sleeves. Add a brooch or a ribbon, if you have one. A little something to make it feel new again. Shoes go on last. Stiff leather. Worn soles. You lace them tightly and stand. The morning is underway. But what of the upper classes? Their morning routines are a different affair, but not as glamorous as you might imagine. For even in a grand house, there is no indoor plumbing. Not yet. The lady of the house may have a porcelain basin and a mirrored vanity. Her pitcher will be filled with warm water, heated by the downstairs scullery maid. Her towels may be linen, embroidered, delicately scented. But she, too, must wash piece by piece. She will sit on a stool as her maid gently wipes her back. The same ritual, the same chill, perhaps a bit more grace, but no less inconvenience. And the bath? The copper tub. Once a week, if lucky, servants haul it into the bedroom and fill it, bucket by bucket, with warm water. The lady bathes first. Then, if the water is still usable, it may be reused. For her daughter, her sister, perhaps even the servants, last of all. One tub, one bath, many bodies. There is no soap for every person. No fresh towel each time. Water is precious. Heating it takes time and fuel. Baths are rare, reserved. A luxury of effort, not only wealth. Now, think of children. Little boys sent to school with unwashed faces. Little girls with hair tied in hurried braids, lice hidden beneath ribbons. No time to clean properly. No space. No privacy, just cold water, quick cloths, and out the door. In many schools, cleanliness was enforced with humiliation. Dirty hands earned smacks with rulers. Dirty necks got scrubbed raw. But where was the water supposed to come from? Where was the soap? Where was the warmth? Breathe in, then out. Now imagine the chamber pot, still sitting under the bed, still full from the night. Someone will have to empty it. Perhaps you, perhaps not. It will be carried through the house, sloshing, wrapped in cloth to hide the shame. It will be dumped out back, out front, into a cesspool, a gutter, or over the edge of the window. Wherever it goes, it never goes far. The smell clings. And yet, everyone continues. Every morning, the same steps. Cold water, stale clothes, brushed hair, a little perfume if you have it, a sprig of rosemary, a bit of powder, not to be clean, but to appear clean. Because appearance is everything. Even in dirt, dignity is preserved. Let that settle for a moment. In a world without bathrooms, without running water, without fluffy towels or scented soap, people still found ways to face the day. They still stood before cracked mirrors and did what they could. They still took pride in their faces, their posture, their presentation. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Hair care with eggs and ashes. Now let's talk about hair. Not the elegant curls of the portraits or the carefully styled buns of the ladies in lace. Not the shiny, pomaded waves of the gentlemen with their canes and walking gloves. But real hair, daily hair, lived-in hair. You see, hair care in the Victorian era was less about fashion and more about function, patience, and improvisation. Because shampoo, as we know it, didn't exist yet. You couldn't walk into a shop and find a row of bottles labeled hydrating, volumizing, or citrus-scented. What you could find were natural materials. Familiar, sometimes strange, sometimes smelly. Let your breath settle in as we lift the lid on this topic. Women, in particular, prided themselves on their hair. Long, thick, and often untouched by scissors for years. But without modern conditioners, detangling sprays, or hair dryers, keeping it presentable was a daily battle. Hair wasn't washed often. Once a week? Maybe once every 2 weeks. And even then, the process was long. Involved. Wet hair took hours to dry, and in cold weather, it might never fully dry before bedtime. Which meant washing it was not just a task, but an ordeal. So what did they use? Let's start with eggs. A woman might crack 2 or 3 eggs into a bowl. Whisk them lightly. Then, with great care, rub the mixture into her scalp and hair. Because the yolk has natural oils and lecithin, which clean and soften. And in a time when lather and foam were not expected, this was as good as it got. But there were challenges. Raw egg is sticky, unpleasant if not rinsed properly. And if the water is too hot, the eggs cook. Yes, scrambled eggs. In your hair. So the water had to be just warm enough. And rinsing had to be thorough. Some women added vinegar to the rinse, apple cider, if they could find it, to remove oils and leave a slight shine. Others swore by herbs, rosemary, chamomile, nettle, steeped into teas, then poured over the scalp. There were alternatives too. For those without access to eggs or herbs, wood ash was used. Mixed with water into a thin gray paste, it acted as a primitive soap. Lye-based, abrasive, but effective in a rough way. It stripped oil, dirt, thin, sometimes too much. Others used soapwort, a foaming plant, or even beer, which added body to hair despite the scent. Some Victorian women swore by brandy, mixed with honey, to treat dry ends. The results varied, but creativity was endless. Now breathe in and picture the comb. Combs were carved from wood, bone, or ivory. Brushes were made of boar bristle or stiff horsehair. Detangling long hair took time, especially without conditioner. Women would sit by the fire and work slowly from tip to root, section by section. It was a ritual, a moment of quiet, sometimes shared between mother and daughter, sister and sister. Braiding came after. Long plaits to keep hair neat, or coiled buns pinned carefully. Hairpins were essential. Lost ones turned up in corners, under beds, tucked behind ears. Let your breath slow. Feel the rhythm of this gentle care. For men, hair care was simpler, but still had its rules. A gentleman would wet his hair in the morning with cold water. Apply pomade, usually made of animal fat and scented with herbs or citrus oil. Then comb it neatly. Side part, middle part, always precise. Pomade gave hair shine, but also attracted dust. Over time, it turned rancid. The smell was complex. And yet, reapplication continued day after day. Washing was rare. Instead, men might powder their scalps, like their faces, to mask grease. Barbers played a role here. Weekly visits included trimming, oiling, sometimes scalp massage. A straight razor shave, pomade reapplication, and a splash of cologne. Shared tools. No sanitation, but highly social. Let's not forget headwear. Everyone wore something. Bonnets, caps, top hats, bowlers. Hair wasn't always visible, which helped. Greasy strands could be hidden, dandruff covered, but hats trapped heat and sweat. In summer, heads itched. In winter, hair flattened and froze. Clean hair was relative, and so was smell. You see, no one expected others to smell like lavender or lemon. Everyone was a little sour, a little earthy. The difference between clean and filthy was more about presentation than perfection. Fresh ribbon, polished comb, hairpin gesso. It gave the illusion of order. That's what mattered. Now picture a poor girl brushing her hair by candlelight. Her comb missing teeth. Her hair thick, heavy, tangled from sleep. Her mother dipping a rag into vinegar water, smoothing flyaways. Pinning it up with care. They know the world sees them as lesser. So they fight back, with neatness, with control, with effort. Because in a world where filth is everywhere, tidiness becomes resistance. You let that thought settle into your bones. Hair was never just hair. It was identity. A message sent quietly in braids and buns and polished curls. I am here. I care. I am trying. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, your head resting on a fresh pillowcase, think of the women who went to sleep with egg-scented hair wrapped in linen towels. Of the men who brushed in silence by the fire, parting their hair with a comb worn smooth by years of use. Of the patience it took, the time, the will. And let yourself drift deeper into that place between then and now. No toothbrush, no problem? Take a moment. Run your tongue over your teeth. Smooth? Clean? A subtle minty aftertaste from toothpaste? You likely don't even think about it. Brushing is just part of the day. Something automatic, unremarkable. But it wasn't always that way. Now breathe in gently and step back again into the Victorian morning. Let's talk about teeth, or more precisely, how little people could do to care for them. You see, toothbrushes existed, technically, but they weren't common, not in the way you're imagining now. The bristles were often made of animal hair, stiff hog bristle, set into bone or wood handles. And they were expensive, delicate, rough on the gums. Not everyone had one. And toothpaste? That's another story. There were powders, often homemade. A mixture of chalk, crushed charcoal, salt, and sometimes ground brick. If you had some peppermint oil, you could add a drop. But that was a luxury. Most used what they had. Charcoal and ashes. Vinegar and salt. Or just a cloth. Many people simply rub their teeth with a rag in the morning. No lather, no foam, no flavored gels, just friction. Some chewed on twigs, especially from trees like willow or licorice root, using the frayed ends as a sort of brush. It worked. Sort of. Not enough to prevent decay, but just enough to make you feel slightly fresher. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw relax. Now imagine you have a toothache, a dull, throbbing pain that creeps through your cheek. It's been days. You can't sleep. You can't eat on one side. The pain is always there, whispering. What do? You can't just go to the dentist. Because there weren't many, at least not trained ones. In most towns, the person who cut your hair might also pull your teeth. The barber, or maybe the blacksmith. Yes, the same man who shoes horses and repairs cartwheels might take a look inside your mouth, with pliers. There was no anesthesia, no numbing cream, just hope, and a strong grip. You sat in a chair, or stood, or were held down. They twisted, yanked. Sometimes the tooth came out whole. Sometimes it broke apart. If infection followed, you prayed. Maybe drank whiskey. Maybe didn't wake up. And yet, dental hygiene mattered. People still cared. If you could afford it, you might buy tooth powder from the chemist. Kept in a little tin. Opened only on Sundays. Brushed with a stiff boar bristle brush, then rinsed with vinegar. Or brandy. Or strong tea. There were also mouth sweeteners, little sugar cubes infused with herbs or flower petals, meant to mask bad breath. Ironically, sugar only made dental issues worse. But breath mattered, especially in conversation, especially in close quarters. When you spoke to someone, they stood inches away. In a crowded streetcar, you could taste the air they exhaled. You couldn't smell like rot. So you masked the decay with whatever you had, mint leaves, cloves, or a sip of gin. Let's breathe slowly here. Let the discomfort pass. Because for many, losing teeth was expected. By the age of 30, many had already lost several. By 40, dentures were common, if you could afford them. And they weren't porcelain. They were made from ivory or human teeth. Human. There was a market for teeth, often taken from the dead. After battles, scavengers would pull them from corpses. These were sold as Waterloo teeth, named after the famous war, but applied broadly. Fitted into plates, reshaped, inserted into the mouths of the wealthy. They didn't fit well. They weren't clean, but they restored smiles, gave the illusion of youth, of health. And then there were those who had nothing. No brush, no powder, no treatment, just pain, swollen gums, rotting molars, breath like metal. They lived with it, worked with it, died with it. And yet, even still, people tried. A young girl might be scolded for skipping her morning tooth cloth. A boy might be proud of a new brush carved from bone. A woman might save coins for months to buy a fresh tin of powder, just for Sunday service. Because cleanliness, even when painful, was still tied to dignity. Now imagine a world where tooth pain is a daily norm. Where every bite is careful. Where smiles are measured. Where laughter is hidden behind handkerchiefs or fans. Not out of shyness, but shame. And yet, they still smiled. They still kissed, whispered secrets, laughed in candlelit kitchens and wind-blown alleyways, shared meals of crusty bread and thick stew, teeth aching, gums bleeding, but still living. So tonight, when you brush your teeth with your soft bristled toothbrush, when you rinse with clean, minty mouthwash, think of those who had nothing, who scrubbed with ashes, who gargled vinegar, who smiled with gaps, and loved anyway. Let that gratitude wash over you. And as your breath slows, as your jaw softens, remember this. Even without modern hygiene, the human heart still found ways to express joy, to love, to care. Laundry day was once a week, if lucky. Take a breath and think of your laundry basket. Maybe it's full. Maybe it's overflowing. Maybe you've been meaning to wash your sheets or that favorite pair of socks. Maybe your machine hums gently in the background as you read this, tumbling water and soap and soft cotton in a rhythmic whirl. Now imagine this. No machine. No soap as you know it. No hot water on demand. Just a tub. Your hands. And hours, sometimes the entire day, spent scrubbing, wringing, lifting, drying. Welcome to Victorian Laundry Day. It didn't happen every day. Not even close. For many families, laundry was a weekly ritual, if they could manage it. And for the poor, every 2 weeks. Sometimes longer. Because laundry wasn't just a task, it was a trial. Physically, mentally, socially. Let yourself settle into that thought. The week began, usually, with Monday as wash day. A day no one looked forward to. For working-class women, this was a day of labor as exhausting as any factory shift. Their arms would ache. Their backs would burn. Their hands would chap and bleed from lye soap and cold water. Imagine rising before the sun, hauling bucket after bucket of water from a shared pump or backyard well. If you were fortunate, you had a tin washed up. If not, maybe just a basin. Then came the fire. Water had to be heated, no knobs to twist, no heater to click. You lit the stove or fireplace, waited for the kettle to boil, and poured carefully. Only the first bucket was warm. The rest would cool fast. So you worked quickly. And then came the scrubbing. There were no automatic agitators. No gentle cycles. Just you, a washboard, and your fingers. You rubbed each shirt, each undergarment, each cloth against ridged metal, with hard soap, usually homemade or coarse and stinging. You scrubbed until your knuckles cracked, until the fabric thinned, until your wrists shook. Then you rinsed, over and over again, lifting wet garments, heavy as bricks, wringing them by hand. Hunched over the basin, breathing hard. Let your breath slow now. Let your shoulders drop. Now think of the drying. There were no dryers. Just lines if you had them. Or chairs. Or banisters. Or tree branches. Clothes hung from rafters indoors when it rained, dripping onto the floor. They froze stiff in winter, fluttered stiffly in summer breezes filled with soot. Children's stockings were pinned near the hearth. Shirts draped over chairs. Blankets hung across windows, blocking what little light crept in. Laundry filled every corner of the house on Mondays. And then there was the ironing. Yes, ironing. With flat, heavy irons that had to be heated on the stove. No quartz, no steam. Just solid metal, burning hot, lifted with cloth to avoid burns. You ironed everything, collars, sleeves, sheets. Not for comfort, but for appearance. Creases mattered. They meant control, dignity. And if you were wealthy, you didn't do it yourself, someone else did. But it still took time. Sometimes, big households employed laundresses. Women who labored from sunrise to dark in sculleries, basements, or outdoor wash sheds. Their skin reddened by lye. Their fingernails broken. Their clothes always damp, even when dry. Let that settle. Even the rich had limits. Water still had to be carried. Fire still had to be lit. Soap still stung. Towels took days to dry in the cold. And clothes were washed far less often than today. That elegant ball gown? Worn multiple times. Never washed, only aired out and brushed down. That gentleman's coat? Stiff with sweat and dust, cleaned once a season, if that. Underwear? If you had it, 2 or 3 sets, rotated carefully, rinsed by hand between wears. Some wore the same undergarments for days, even weeks. It was normal. And menstrual cloths? They were soaked, washed, dried, always in secret. Hung indoors. Hidden. washed separately from everything else, with boiling water and whispering hands. Because shame clung tighter than stains ever could. You're breathing slowly now, picturing the rhythm of this world. A woman kneeling by a tin basin, her sleeves rolled, her face streaked with steam and sweat. The sounds, water sloshing, soap scraping, cloths wringing, children chattering in the background, a kettle whistling, a baby fussing in a corner cradle. This was a Monday, and when the laundry was done, there were meals to cook, floors to scrub, firewood to chop, and laundry to start again in a week. So the in-between days mattered. People wore aprons over dresses, cravats over shirts, linens over pillows, layers to protect the layers beneath. Clothes were brushed, not washed. A stain? Covered with ribbon. A tear? Mended, not replaced. Because every wash shortened the life of the garment. And every wash took everything you had. And yet, they did it. Week after week. With aching hands. With patience. With pride. Because being clean, even just appearing clean, was survival. Socially. Spiritually. Emotionally. So tonight, as your clothes tumble in a stainless steel machine with detergent that smells like lavender fields, think of those women, those men, those children, who scrubbed with cracked hands and hung wet clothes in cold wind, who ironed with heat from a flame, who washed to be seen, to be respected, to endure. Because cleanliness, for them, was not routine. It was resistance. Perfume versus putrid smells. Let your breath slow. And now, let's talk about smell. In the Victorian world, it was everywhere. Heavy, stubborn, clinging to every surface, floating in every alley, settling in every fabric fold. It wasn't just the smell of sweat. It was everything. The scent of damp stone walls, soaked with rain and mold. The acrid bite of coal smoke drifting from chimneys. The sour tang of unwashed bodies packed into narrow rooms. The sharp ammonia of chamber pots long overdue for emptying. And in summer, when heat stirred the streets, the full perfume of rot, filth, waste. There were no garbage trucks. No sewage plants. Waste flowed down open gutters. Dead animals decayed in corners. Rotten food piled behind kitchens. The air itself seemed tired. Tired of trying to be clean. So what did they do? They didn't remove the smells. They didn't clean them. They covered them. Enter the world of Victorian perfume. Not a finishing touch. Not a pleasant luxury. But a necessity. Let your shoulders drop as we step into the powder room of a lady, or the shaving station of a gentleman, and explore what they used to survive the stench. For the upper classes, scent was a signature. Lavender water splashed on linens. Rose oils dabbed behind ears. Violet sachets tucked into sleeves and bodices. Cedar, sandalwood, citrus peels, stored in drawers and closets, pressed into handkerchiefs. A woman might carry a posy, a small bouquet of fragrant herbs and flowers, held close to her nose as she walked the streets. Sometimes called a tussy-mussy, it was a polite way to avoid the reek of city air without comment. But that was for the fortunate. For everyone else, it was whatever they could find. Rags soaked in vinegar, soap scraps kept in tin boxes, spoons of baking soda tucked under beds, or simply nothing. The working poor developed a strange relationship with smell. They knew they reeked. So did everyone else. It became part of the background, like fog or footsteps. But there was shame too. A girl might be teased at school for her pig stink. A servant scolded for sour underarms. A gentleman mocked for coat sweat. So people did what they could. Brushed their clothes, dusted their skin with starch, scrubbed their shoes, perfumed their hair ribbons. Because appearances were everything. You couldn't wash often, but you could mask. Let's pause now and take in the absurd. The belief at the time was that bad smells caused disease. The miasma theory, widely accepted, stated that foul air itself was poisonous. And so, the solution? More smell. Churches burned incense. Homes lit herbal candles. Hospitals placed bowls of vinegar in the corners. Wealthy homes sprayed their rooms with rosewater, citrus oils, or burning pine. When the smell of the Great Stink overwhelmed London in the 1850s, when the Thames turned brown and thick and unbearable, Parliament hurried to act. Not because of health concerns, but because the smell reached inside the House of Commons. Change began only when the odor interrupted power. You breathe in, gratefully. Your air is clean. Invisible. This was visible in its weight. Smell was a presence, a character in every home. And perfume? A desperate attempt at civility. But perfumes then weren't the bottled delicacies we know now. They were heavy, sometimes sickly sweet, made from whale ambergris, civet glands, or opium-laced florals. They mingled with the stink instead of replacing it, creating a scent both intoxicating and nauseating. The wealthy wore too much, often to mask too much. And the result? A room that smelled like lilies and sweat, like powder and putrefaction, like flowers and bodies. Let that settle. Because here's the irony. Modern people would run from those smells, but the Victorians found them comforting, familiar, necessary. It reminded them they were human, alive, trying. They used lemon to scrub freckles, butter to soften skin, raw meat as facial masks, perfume to ward off death. They did what they could, because in a world where you couldn't fix the stink, you had to learn to live beside it. So tonight, as you lie beneath a freshly washed blanket, in a room filled with nothing but quiet, unscented air, think of them. Of the girl carrying lavender in her pocket, the boy brushing coal dust from his collar, the mother lighting dried rosemary on the hearth, the gentleman dabbing amber oil on a silk cravat. Not to impress, but to endure. Let's talk about underwear, or the lack thereof. Take a breath, and now exhale slowly, because this next part, well, it's personal, intimate, and yet entirely human. Let's talk about underwear, or more accurately, the absence of it. In the Victorian era, what lay beneath the outer layers of clothing was a delicate subject. It wasn't something spoken of openly. It wasn't written about in letters. And yet, it shaped daily comfort, hygiene, and dignity. First, let's start with the obvious. No one had a full drawer of clean underthings. There were no wardrobes packed with cotton briefs or lace-trimmed bras. No fresh pairs for every day of the week. No elastic. No lycra. No convenience. Most working-class people had 2 sets of underclothes. One on the body, one drying by the fire. If they were lucky, let your breath settle into that rhythm. One on, one off, one being worn while the other slowly dried. And what did these garments look like? For women, a linen shift or chemise, loose, ankle length, worn under everything else. It absorbed sweat, protected outer clothes from the skin, and it was rarely changed. Because washing took effort, water, so the same chemise might be worn for several days, or a week, or longer. Over that, if she had the means, a woman might wear a corset, a petticoat, or bloomers. But bloomers were controversial, considered too masculine when they were first introduced. And among the poor, they were often skipped entirely, which meant that beneath their skirts, many women wore nothing at all. Now pause. Let that sit. No underwear. Just fabric, and air, and modesty by movement. Because underwear wasn't about comfort back then. It was about practicality. And even that came second to poverty. For men, undergarments meant drawers, knee-length, loose-fitting, often made of wool or coarse cotton. Not replaced often. Not easy to wash. The elastic waistband hadn't been invented, so they were fastened with ties, buttons, or belts. They itched. They bunched. They smelled. But they were considered essential for laborers and apprentices, for those who moved and sweated, for those whose outer pants were too expensive to wash frequently. Now think about nighttime. At night, many removed what little they wore during the day, not because they had pajamas, but because their single set of clothing needed time to air out. They slept in shifts, or completely nude, under heavy wool blankets shared with siblings, or parents, or strangers. It was normal. It was survival. Let's not forget menstruation. For Victorian women, monthly bleeding was a private struggle, handled with rags, often called clouts. These were pieces of cloth, folded and pinned, held in place by belts or knots. They weren't disposable. They weren't sterile. They were rinsed, both dried discreetly, never hung outside, always inside, in corners, under beds, behind curtains. You couldn't let the neighbors see. You couldn't let the children ask. You pretended it didn't exist. And when cramps came, you suffered in silence. You carried on with laundry, with work, with prayer, because no one had time for rest. Even the word underwear wasn't common. People called them small clothes, unmentionables, or simply didn't mention them at all. But still, these garments, humble as they were, held meaning. They represented cleanliness, even if only relative. They separated the skin from the world. They gave a sense of privacy, of self. So when one lost access to clean undergarments, when you wore the same chemise for weeks, when your drawers grew stiff with salt and sweat, it was more than discomfort. It was a blow to dignity. And yet, they managed. They rinsed at night with leftover wash water. They dried cloth over the fire and warmed it with hands. They shared sewing needles to mend worn hems and fraying seams. They adjusted, endured, persisted, and still found pride. A neatly folded shift, a well-tied waist, a freshly mended strap. So tonight, as you slip into soft cotton or silk, as you pull on fresh, clean fabric, remember them. Remember the woman who owned 2 chemises, the man who wore woolen drawers until they split, the girl who washed her cloth rags by candlelight, the boy who waited for his only pair to dry beside the hearth. Because clean underwear, as mundane as it seems now, was once a luxury, and even beneath layers of grime and silence, they held onto that thread of dignity with both hands. Chamber pots and night soil men, breathe in gently and let the breath go slowly, because this chapter, it smells, not metaphorically, not symbolically, it smells, literally. Let's talk about where people went to the toilet, because in the Victorian world, there were no modern bathrooms, no private stalls with flush handles and tiled walls. No ventilation fans or porcelain bowls. No toilet paper. No plumbing. Just a pot. And the problem of where to put it when you were done. Enter the chamber pot. A simple bowl, ceramic, tin, or metal, kept under the bed or in a dark corner of the room. Used by all. Shared by many. In the middle of the night, when the air was cold and the streets outside were worse, no one wanted to leave the warmth of their straw-filled mattress. So they relieved themselves right there. In silence, in the dark, and in close quarters. By morning, the pot was full. Someone had to empty it. Sometimes it was the mother. Sometimes the child. Sometimes no one. Let your shoulders drop. Let your face relax. Because what happens next was normal. The pot would be carried through the tenement halls, held at arm's length, sloshing slightly with each step. and then thumped. Into the alley, down a grate, out a window, into a shared outhouse, if you were lucky. Yes, out the window. It was common to hear a shout before it happened. Garde l'eau, a French phrase, watch out for the water, yelled as a warning before waste rained down onto the cobblestone street below. That's how sidewalks became soiled. That's how doorways stank. That's how cities earned their sour reputation. Because the waste didn't go anywhere. It stayed, soaked into the ground, clogged the drains, mixed with rainwater, ran in open gutters alongside children's footsteps. Let that image settle. Now, let's meet the night soil men. They were workers, brave, unloved, underpaid, and they handled everyone's secret filth. Their job? To empty the cesspools, the backyard privies, and the collection pits under homes. Not in daylight, no. It was too disgusting for polite society to witness. So they came at night, carrying large barrels, long-handled scoops, wearing boots caked with something that never came off. They would descend into underground pits, sometimes up to their knees, sometimes deeper. They shoveled human waste into carts and hauled it away, out of the city, into the fields, or wherever it was accepted. It was dangerous. The gas could suffocate. The ladders could slip. Sometimes the waste pits caved in and swallowed the worker whole. And still they came, night after night, because without them, the city choked. Without them, disease festered faster. And yet, they were invisible. No one thanked them. No one looked them in the eye. Children were told to stay away. Men were told they weren't real workers. But they were. They were the only line between survival and collapse. Now think of the cesspools beneath homes. Yes, beneath. Even the wealthy, with their fancy water closets, had only rudimentary plumbing. The waste from upstairs toilets didn't go far. It dropped into stone-lined pits under the floor. Out of sight, but never out of smell. The ammonia, the fermentation, it rose through the boards, soaked the carpet, clung to curtains. People tried everything. Perfumes, floor powders, opening windows, lighting candles. But the source was always beneath. Now pause and consider this. In the summer, the stench became unbearable. In the winter, the contents froze and expanded. And when it rained, the pits overflowed. Down hills, through alleyways, into rivers, like the Thames, which became not a river, but a running sewer. And what of toilet paper? It didn't exist. People used rags, corners, old newspaper, pages torn from books, or simply nothing. They wiped with what they had, washed when they could, and pretended it wasn't unpleasant, because they had no choice. Let your breath return now, gently, steady, because even in this filth, they endured. They taught their children to empty the pot with care, to scrub the floors when spills occurred, to cover the smell with lavender, to walk carefully when the streets glistened wrong. It was a world held together by tolerance, by habit, by those who did the jobs no one spoke of. So tonight, as you flush a toilet and watch the waste vanish, as you light a scented candle in a clean bathroom, think of them. The woman who carried the pot out every dawn, the child who slipped on the wet alley bricks, the man who descended into a pit and climbed back up. They lived in a world of smell and shame, and made it work, because someone had to. The great stink of London. Take a breath. A clean one, because the breath we're about to step into was not clean, not at all. Let's go back to the summer of 1858, a season so hot, so still, that it made all of London stop breathing. They called it the Great Stink, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Let your imagination drift to the banks of the River Thames, Not the postcard-perfect river we know today, but a wide, slow-moving channel of waste, thick, bubbling in the heat, lined with factories, slaughterhouses, and privies, fed by open sewers from every direction, carrying everything from rotting food to dead animals and human waste. For decades, the Thames had taken it all. Silently, constantly, a flowing graveyard of London's unseen filth. But in 1858, something changed. That summer, the heat didn't break. No breeze came, and the water level dropped, leaving raw sewage baking in the sun. Day after day, the smell became unbearable. Windows were shut tight. Curtains were soaked in vinegar. People walked with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. Rich and poor alike began to gag. Newspapers described it as the foulest stench ever known to man. Priests collapsed during services. Children vomited in the streets. Even the Parliament, sitting in its grand building right on the river, couldn't escape. Curtains were soaked in chloride. Lime was poured on the riverbank, but the stench crept through every stone. Politicians panicked. Debate was impossible. No one could think. No one could speak. They fled the chambers, faces covered, stomachs heaving. It wasn't cholera this time. It wasn't typhoid. It wasn't invisible. It was smell. And for the first time, it was too strong to ignore. Let your breath settle. Because what came next was change. London had faced epidemics before. Thousands had died, but nothing was done. Now the city stank, and people in power were directly affected. That made it different. That made it urgent. So Parliament did what it had never done before. It acted. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer, a quiet genius, and the man who would change the city forever. His task? Build an entirely new sewer system. Massive, hidden, and able to carry waste away, not just down the street, but out of the city. The plan was radical, and it began fast. Thousands of workers were hired. Miles of brick tunnels were laid. Entire streets were dug up. Neighborhoods were torn down. Pump stations the size of castles were built. The city became a construction site. For years, noise. Steam engines puffing in alleyways. Horses pulling carts filled with stone and brick. Night and day, progress marched forward. Bazalgette understood something no one had before. If you want a system to last, overbuild it. And he did. He made the tunnels twice as wide as needed, because he knew London would grow. And grow it did. His system, built in the 1860s, still serves the city today. Let that settle. Because this was more than an engineering feat. It was a shift in thinking. For centuries, people believed bad smells caused disease. The miasma theory. But now, with science emerging, and visionaries like Dr. John Snow tracing cholera to water, not air, people were beginning to understand. It wasn't the stink. It was the source of the stink. It was the water, the waste, the unwashed hands, the unclean tools, the shared buckets and reused rags. Clean water meant survival. Separation of waste meant life. And Bazalgette's sewers made both possible. Now breathe in. Clean air. Clean understanding. Clean perspective. Because the great stink, as awful as it was, became a turning point. It showed the world that filth had consequences. That invisibility wasn't immunity. That you could ignore disease, but you couldn't ignore smell. And in that terrible summer, London grew up. It traded superstition for science, ignored tradition in favor of toilets, and finally, started building a city where people didn't have to live beside their own waste. So tonight, as you flush a toilet, run a faucet, take a breath, think of the river that once rebelled. Think of the people who finally listened, not because they cared for the poor, but because they could no longer hold their noses. Change comes not from wisdom, but from stench. Copper tubs for the rich, cold cloths for the rest. Breathe in, and picture warm water, steam rising in soft spirals, a copper tub gleaming in candlelight, a room perfumed with rose oil, a servant pouring hot water from a kettle, a robe laid out beside the fire. For some, bathing in the Victorian era was beautiful, but only for some, because most bathed in shivers. Let's start with the copper tubs. If you were wealthy, truly wealthy, you didn't just own a tub. You had someone to fill it. Copper was the favored material. It held heat well. It looked elegant. It cost a fortune. But a tub is only useful when filled, and indoor plumbing was rare. So water had to be carried, bucket by bucket, from the kitchen stove, up narrow stairs, by housemaids or footmen with sore shoulders. The bath itself was scheduled, a ritual, a production. The mistress bathed first, perhaps in water scented with lavender or milk. She soaked, she sighed, she was scrubbed gently with a sponge, then toweled off with linen. Next came the daughter, then the youngest son, then maybe the governess, the servants. If there was water left, if it was still warm, they bathed too. Now let that contrast sink in, because for the poor, there was no tub, no servants, no scented water, no privacy, just a bowl, a cloth, a patch of floor near the hearth. This was called a strip wash. You stood, partially undressed, dipped a rag into cold water, and scrubbed the parts that mattered. Armpits, feet, maybe more, if you were feeling brave. There was no soap unless you'd saved for it. No towel unless you repurposed a worn shirt. No heat unless the fire was already lit for cooking. And in winter, your breath fogged in front of your face. The rag froze stiff between rinses. Water dripped onto the floor and turned to ice. Children screamed when the cloth touched skin. But it was the only option. And it wasn't done every day. Maybe once a week. Maybe less. Because water had to be fetched. Because heat was precious. Because time was scarce. Now picture a public bathhouse. A place where the working poor could pay a few pennies to access hot water. Separate days for men and women. Separate tubs, filled and emptied between turns. Simple. Sterile. But still out of reach for many. And even there was judgment. Clothes hung on pegs. Bodies revealed. Scars. Dirt. Shame. Some chose to stay home. To strip wash in silence. To stay invisible. Let your breath soften. Because bathing in the Victorian era was not about luxury. It was about layers. Social. Financial. Physical. For the rich. It was ritual. For the poor. It was survival. And yet, both groups shared one truth. No one bathed every day. No one felt perfectly clean. Even the copper tubs grew cold. Even the linen towels grew stiff. Even the perfumed water could not erase the truth of the air around them. Because the world was dirty. The streets were foul. The air was thick. The water, often suspect. So they did what they could. The rich poured in oils. The poor poured in courage. And somewhere, in the space between steam and stone, they tried to feel human again. So tonight, as you step into your tiled shower, as warm water runs at the turn of a knob, as soap foams in your palm and drains swirl it away, remember, for them, cleanliness took effort, muscle, fire. It wasn't daily. It wasn't assumed. And yet, they still tried. They wiped. They scrubbed. They poured and hauled and carried. And for a few minutes each week, they felt the warmth and let it wash over them. Victorian beauty secrets that could kill you. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a vanity table, polished wood, a small silver mirror, bottles of perfume, powder puffs, rouge pots, brushes of bone and boar bristle, and the faintest whiff of rose water, blended with something harsher, metallic, strange. Because beauty in the Victorian era was not only demanding, it was dangerous. Let's begin with the face. Women wanted pale skin, not fair, not light, almost sickly, because tan skin suggested labor, outdoor work, peasantry. But a ghost-like complexion? That was aristocratic, refined, protected. So they painted themselves with lead. Yes, white lead powder, the same substance used in paint and pipes. It gave the skin a perfect matte finish. It also slowly poisoned the wearer. Symptoms crept in over time. Headaches, stomach pain, shaking hands, skin that thinned and bruised easily. But it didn't matter, because beauty was worth it. And besides, everyone was doing it. Now add a touch of rouge, made from mercury salts. A warm flush on the cheeks, also good for causing tremors, memory loss, and hallucinations. Then the eyes. Women outlined them with kohl, a black powder made with antimony, a toxic metal. It made the whites of the eyes stand out. It also made vision blurry, sometimes permanently. Lips. Red was desirable, so they used lip stains made from crushed insects and sometimes lead oxide. They called it Venetian ceruse. We'd call it industrial poison. Let your breath slow, because now comes the part most people forget. Washing hair was rare, we've covered that. But styling it? That was daily. Pomades were made from animal fat, mixed with perfumes to mask the smell. Over time, the fat turned rancid, and the smell mixed with sweat, dust, smoke. It clung to everything. Some women used eggs or beer as cleansers. Some added ash to darken their hair. Others sprinkled powder made from starch and chalk. But some went further. They used arsenic wafers, swallowed them, to clear the skin, to brighten the eyes, to make the hair shine. And yes, arsenic, the same chemical used in rat poison. They believed that in small amounts, it enhanced beauty. And to be fair, it did, for a little while. Then came vomiting, hairless, organ failure, and death. But the packaging was elegant, the promises seductive, the risks dismissed. Breathe in, and consider the context. This was a world without dermatologists, without the FDA, without ingredient lists or safety warnings. If it was sold at the apothecary, it must be fine. If your friend used it and looked lovely, it must be safe. Even face masks had hazards. One popular recipe? Raw meat. Slices of beef pressed onto the skin at night, believed to draw out heat and reduce puffiness. And they did, but they also attracted insects and left the bedroom smelling like a butcher's shop. Let's not forget freckle removers made from lemon juice and ammonia, or tooth powder containing brick dust, or perfumes mixed with formaldehyde and turpentine, because to smell pleasant, to look polished, that was power. It was status, and it was deeply gendered. A man could be rugged, sun-darkened, sweaty. A woman? She had to look like she'd never touched a coal scuttle in her life. But even men had their poisons. Hair tonics laced with lead, shaving creams containing mercury, and colognes strong enough to make the eyes water. They suffered quietly, lost teeth, lost skin, sometimes lost their minds, but they never lost their manners. Because Victorian beauty wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about health. It was about presentation, illusion, control. So tonight, as you wash your face with gentle soap, as you brush your teeth with minty paste, as you apply moisturizer from a bottle with ingredients you can actually pronounce, and give thanks, because once to look healthy was to risk everything. And many did, quietly, faithfully, fatally. The high cost of hair. Let your breath settle. Now imagine a mirror. A woman sits before it, her back straight, her hair thick, dark, coiled like silk. But what you don't see is the pain beneath it, because in the Victorian world, hair was everything. It was your crown, your reputation, your femininity, and for some, even your currency. Let's begin with length. A proper Victorian woman wore her hair long, down to the waist, or longer. Cutting it? Unthinkable, unless you were gravely ill, or destitute. In fact, many poor women sold their hair. Yes, sold it. To wig makers, to hair merchants, to salons that created switches, bundles of real hair that wealthy women clipped into their own. It was a quiet transaction, held in back alleys and shop basements. The hair was measured, snipped, brushed, and boiled, then styled into curls or braids for someone else's vanity. Let your imagination follow it. A factory girl, pale and coughing, selling the last thing she owns, her hair, so a duchess can have fuller curls. Now picture the rituals of upkeep. Hair was not washed often, maybe once every few weeks, but because there was no shampoo, no blow dryers, no convenient conditioners, washing meant soaking with rainwater, eggs, or ale, then brushing for hours, then drying near the fire, risking sparks, risking illness. The combing was relentless. Every night, 100 strokes, to redistribute oil, to detangle knots, to catch lice. Because even the wealthiest heads were not immune. Parasites thrived in hair held tight for days. Bonnets and hats made it worse. Hair oil made them harder to detect. And what about styling? To create those elaborate updos, women used rat rolls. No, not real rats. Clumps of their own fallen hair, collected from brushes, then sewn into mesh forms. These were tucked under braids and buns to add height. They also used pomades, thick mixtures of fat and beeswax. When perfumed, they masked odors. When not, well, you noticed. But nothing compared to the heat. Some curled their hair with irons heated in the fire. There were no temperature controls, no warnings, just glowing metal and guesswork. One slip, and a scorch mark. But worse, burnt hair. Then came the accessories. Heavy combs, glass pins, metal clips, wire cages to shape the silhouette. These weren't light. Wearing them for hours strained the neck, caused headaches, sometimes drew blood. And wigs? Yes, wigs were fashionable, but also suffocating. They trapped heat, made the scalp itch, contributed to infections. Still, women endured, because thin hair was shameful, because natural texture was unruly, because a well-coiffed head was a badge of respectability. Breathe in. Now picture the men. They weren't spared either. Pomade was popular for them too, usually made with bear grease or lard. It gave a shiny, slicked-back look, but the grease attracted dust. So it clung to collars and pillows. It turned rancid. Men also used hair tonics, advertised as cures for baldness. Most were alcohol-based. Some contained lead, turpentine, or camphor. They tingled. They burned. They didn't work. But the shame of a receding hairline pushed men to try anything. Even arsenic lotions. Even branding the scalp to stimulate follicles. None of it helped. And when all else failed, there were wigs. Often poorly fitted, easily blown off in the wind. The subject of jokes. But behind every joke was fear. Because hair, like cleanliness, was tied to morality, to status, to identity, and to lose it was to lose face. So they endured. The itch, the burns, the parasites, the lice, all in pursuit of the image in the mirror. Let your muscles soften. And think of this. The next time you run a comb through your clean hair, when your shampoo foams in warm water, when your dryer hums softly, know that once every strand was a battle, a burden, a secret, and yet they bore it with pins, with oils, with prayers, because in a dirty, disease-filled world, hair was a way to feel beautiful, even if it cost them everything. Sharing beds, sharing air, sharing illness. Close your eyes and imagine a bedroom. Now shrink it. A small wooden room. Damp walls, the plaster peeling. A single candle flickers. One window, barely a slit. And inside, 6 people. A mother, a father, 3 children, and a grandmother coughing. Because in most working-class Victorian homes, space was not a luxury. It was a myth. People lived stacked. Families crammed into one-room flats. Boarders slept in kitchens. Children curled up in drawers. And beds? Beds were shared. Between spouses. Between siblings. Between strangers. Let your breathing slow as you imagine. Lying in a narrow straw mattress. The fabric itchy. The blanket damp. The body beside you restless and sweating. You can smell their breath. Their unwashed skin. Their illness. Because if one person caught something, everyone did. Coughs echoed through the room. Fevers radiated like heat. And there was no escaping it. No separate bedroom. No guest room. No quarantine. Just proximity. And disease loved it. Take tuberculosis. Or as they called it, consumption. It spread in silence. Through coughs. Through speaking. Through shared linens and spoons and kisses goodnight. The sick were kept warm and comfortable. Right in the bed where everyone else slept. Children hugged their dying siblings. Spouses held their feverish wives. There was no other choice. Now imagine the air. No ventilation. No fresh breeze. Just smoke from the fire. Steam from boiling clothes. The stink of sweat and chamber pots. In summer, it was suffocating. In winter, it was sealed, tight against the cold and the world. And in that still air, illness bloomed. Scarlet fever. Measles. Cholera. Smallpox. The poor died in clusters. The rich in isolation. And in the middle, the servants, caring for both, spreading it unknowingly. Now breathe in, and picture the furniture. Beds weren't always mattresses. Sometimes it was just straw on the floor. Sometimes rags. Sometimes nothing. Some families slept sitting up because they had no room to lie down. And still they called it home. Still they washed their faces in cracked bowls. Still they scrubbed their hands before meals. Still they swept the dirt floors every day. Because even in poverty, there was dignity. Let your thoughts wander to the boarding houses. Dozens of men sharing bunks, each paying a few pence a night. They worked in factories, slaughterhouses, coal yards. They came home exhausted, filthy, coughing black dust. And they collapsed side by side. In rooms so small you could touch both walls with your arms outstretched. Some didn't even get a full bed. They paid for a shift, half a night's sleep before the next worker arrived. This was called hot bedding. One man got out, and the other climbed in. Still warm, still sweating, still contagious. Now imagine children, sick children. There was no children's hospital, no pediatric ward, just mothers trying to keep their little ones alive, with vinegar cloths and whispered lullabies. When a child died, they were sometimes laid out in the same bed for days, while the family mourned, while others still slept there, because there was nowhere else. Can you feel it now? The intimacy of disease, the weight of shared breath, the terrible closeness of poverty. And yet, families still laughed, still told stories, still sang lullabies, still celebrated birthdays even in sickness. Because love, even in cramped quarters, finds a way. So tonight, as you stretch out alone in your bed, as you feel clean sheets beneath your body, as you breathe filtered air in a silent room, give thanks, because once a bed was not a sanctuary. It was a battleground, a risk, a necessity shared by too many and feared for what it carried. But it was also a place of tenderness, of whispered goodnights, of hands held in darkness. Because even in the filth, even in disease, they love. A doctor's tools, hope, and harm. Let's begin with a sound. Metal clinking in a bowl. A door creaking open. The heavy footsteps of a man in a black coat. And silence. Because when a Victorian doctor walked in, he carried two things. Hope and danger. Now breathe in and step into his office. The air smells of sweat, chalk dust, and ink. A worn leather chair waits in the center. A cabinet of mysterious bottles lines the wall. And beside it, a tray of tools. Not stainless steel. Not sterilized. Just used. A bone saw, still speckled with rust. A pair of forceps with wooden handles. And a scalpel, dulled from years of cutting. This was medicine. And this was trust. Because in 19th century Britain, medicine was as much performance as science. No one knew what germs were. Not yet. No gloves. No masks. No sterilization. Doctors would go from autopsy to childbirth, wiping their hands on the same apron. They meant well, but they killed many. Let your shoulders drop as you imagine a surgery room. There's no anesthesia, only brandy, opium, or prayer. The patient is held down by friends or family. And the goal? A good surgeon could remove a leg in under 3 minutes. A great one in under 1. Because any longer, and the shock might kill the patient before the wound did. The tools were not cleaned between operations. The table was rarely scrubbed. The air was thick with the groans of the last patient. Infection? They called it hospital rot. And they thought it was caused by bad air, not dirty instruments. Now think about childbirth. Many women still gave birth at home, but the wealthier ones went to lying in hospitals. There, they were treated by medical students, young men eager to learn, and unaware they were spreading death. After working on cadavers, they'd examine laboring mothers, without washing their hands. And so came the plague of puerperal fever, childbed fever, a deadly infection, killing mother after mother, silently, predictably. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis in Austria begged doctors to wash their hands. He was mocked, laughed at, dismissed, because hygiene? That was women's business, not science. Now breathe out, and picture the medicine cabinet. A drawer full of opium, the cure for nearly everything. Diarrhea? Opium. Anxiety? Opium. Pain? Sleeplessness? Opium. It soothed. It silenced. And it killed slowly. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, was sold over the counter. To mothers. To babies. To anyone who could pay. Withdrawal wasn't understood. Addiction wasn't named. It was just nerves, and it was common. Now let's talk about bloodletting. Doctors believed many illnesses were caused by excess. Too much blood, too much bile, too much emotion. So they drained it with knives, with leeches, with heated cups. Patients would grow pale, weak, and sometimes unconscious. But if they died, the illness was to blame, not the cure. Now pause and reflect on their intentions. Most doctors wanted to help. They weren't monsters, but they were trapped in a world of guesses, Oltecs, superstition, and desperate families. Even things that worked, like amputations for gangrene, were done in terrible conditions. There were no antibiotics, no sutures as we know them, no aftercare. Survivors were lucky. Now breathe deep and think of how far we've come. Sterile rooms, disinfected tools, pain relief, informed consent. We trust our doctors because they have evidence, training, standards. But once, hope was placed in shaking hands, holding unclean knives, in candlelit rooms. And somehow, people still went, still believed, still prayed the doctor could save them, even when they left in greater pain than when they arrived, even when the cure was worse than the disease. Because hope is stubborn, even when the world is dirty, even when the science is wrong. People will always reach out for the chance to be healed. And that hope, that stubborn, fragile hope, is what brought us forward. Perfume, pomade, and the war against stench. Inhale gently. Now imagine the smell of 1850s London. Not the scent of roses. Not baked bread. Not morning dew on cobblestones. No, this was the smell of waste. Sewage. Rotten meat. Sweat. Unwashed bodies. It clung to everything. The air, the curtains, the clothes. It lived in the walls and under fingernails. It curled into your lungs and stayed there. But the Victorians had a solution. Perfume. If you couldn't remove the smell, you could mask it. So let's walk through a Victorian parlor. A lady sits beside the window, dabbing rose water behind her ears. The scent is light, delicate, but underneath it, her dress has been worn for 5 days. She hasn't bathed since last week, and the chamber pot in the hallway hasn't been emptied. So she adds more perfume, then more. Now picture a gentleman. He slicks his hair back with pomade, a mix of fat and oil. He rubs scented balm on his mustache. He steps out into the street, and the odor of horse dung and soot hits him. He pulls out a scented handkerchief, always ready, holds it to his nose like a shield, and he breathes through lavender while the world decays around him. Take a deep breath now, and know how rare that is. Because for the Victorians, bad smells meant bad health. They believed in something called miasma theory, the idea that foul air caused disease. Not bacteria, not viruses, just the smell. So when cholera spread, they sprayed perfume in the streets, hung bundles of herbs over doorways, carried posies in their pockets. It didn't work, but it felt safer. And sometimes, feeling safe was all they had. Let's talk about pomade. It wasn't just about style. It was protection. Hair caught scent easily. Smoke, kitchen grease, body odor, it all stayed in the strands. So they coated it. Beef tallow. Bear fat if you were wealthy. Mixed with lemon oil, jasmine, cloves. The smell was powerful. Overwhelming. But it worked, at least for a while. Until the fat went rancid. Until the hair turned stiff and yellow. Until lice made their home beneath the scented crust. Now think of the home. Curtains soaked in tobacco smoke. Sofas that smelled like generations of sweat. Carpets that never saw water. So they fumigated. With vinegar. With tar. With burning herbs. Some even lit sulfur candles to purify the air, though it choked them in the process. A little death, they believed, to avoid the big one. Now picture a woman's vanity table. Dozens of glass vials. Labels in faded ink, musk, civet, ambergris. Some scents came from animal glands. The more pungent, the better. They dabbed perfume not just on skin, but on clothes, on letters, on furniture, because to smell clean was more important than being clean. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift to the market. There, among the vegetables and chickens, a seller hawks toilet vinegar. A woman buys 2 bottles, not to drink, but to wipe down her body with cloth. Cold, sharp, acidic. Better than nothing. Better than stinking. Because stinking meant poor. Stinking meant dirty. Stinking meant morally flawed. So they spent what little they had on scent, even if it caused headaches, even if it made babies cry, even if it set off asthma, because scent was status. Now reflect on how scent shaped spaces. Hospitals soaked in carbolic acid to mask rot. Theaters burned incense. Churches swung censers to fill the air with holy smoke. Everywhere, people were fighting a losing battle against the stench of their own world. But what they didn't know was that the smell wasn't the enemy. The filth was. And perfume couldn't clean drains. It couldn't disinfect water. It couldn't stop cholera. But it gave people control. A way to say, I may be surrounded by disease, but I still have grace. I still have dignity. I still smell like someone. Now take one last breath. And remember this. The next time you choose your soap, or light a candle, or spray something sweet into the room, you're not just refreshing a space. You're part of a tradition, a war against the invisible, a hope that scent could protect us. Sometimes, just sometimes, it did. Filth as fashion, the dangerous beauty of Victorian cosmetics. Close your eyes for a moment. Now picture a Victorian woman at her vanity. The candle flickers. Her mirror is cracked. And laid out before her, bottles, powders, brushes, and jars, each a small weapon in the war for beauty. This is not a world of organic creams and dermatologists. This is a world where danger is disguised in blush, and death comes powdered in pearl. Let's begin with the face. Pale skin was prized. It meant you were wealthy, refined, untouched by sun or labor. To achieve it, women used white face powders made from lead carbonate, arsenic, chalk, and starch. Sometimes even mercury. These powders made skin porcelain, but they also made it peel, turn gray, and eventually rot. And the irony? When their skin began to show the damage, they applied more powder, layer after layer, until they were hiding wounds beneath elegance. Now breathe, and let's add color. Rouge was made with red lead or cinnabar, mercury sulfide. It gave the cheeks that lovely glow, until it poisoned the blood, until gums bled and teeth fell out, until the vibrant blush became permanent, because it was inflammation. Lipsticks? Also made with mercury, carmine from crushed insects, or mixtures of grease and dye that turned rancid in summer heat. And eyes? The Victorian eye was a dangerous thing. Eyeliner was made from antimony, a toxic metal. Mascara was sometimes crafted from soot and wax. Belladonna drops were used to dilate pupils, to make eyes look larger and more seductive. But belladonna is a neurotoxin. It could cause blurry vision, light sensitivity, and even permanent blindness, all in the name of allure. Now shift your gaze to the hair. Victorian hair products were rich, scented, heavy, and deadly. Women used bear fat and beef tallow, which turned rancid, lead-based tonics to enhance shine, sulfur solutions to fight dandruff. Some even dyed their hair with metal salts, which reacted with their sweat and turned their scalp green. The smell of all this? Rotten fat, perfume, and sometimes raw meat. Because yes, some women literally slept with slices of raw beef on their faces. They believed it would tighten skin and erase lines. Instead, it attracted flies, and bacteria, and sometimes infection. But the result? A temporary softness, a fleeting bloom. And in the world of the Victorian woman, that was worth it. Because beauty wasn't just vanity. It was power. It was marriage. It was security. It was the only currency a woman might have. And so they risked it. They risked their health, their eyesight, for a place in society. Now breathe again. And consider this. Doctors at the time began noticing something odd. Wealthy women, the most refined, were often sickly, pale, and mentally fatigued. Some called it toilet poisoning. Others blamed hysteria, weak nerves, or femininity itself. But the truth? It was the beauty treatments. And because the rich had access to the best poisons, they suffered the worst consequences. The poor, meanwhile, couldn't afford powdered lead, and thus lived longer, though with fewer compliments. Let your shoulders drop. And now look at the costume balls, the evening gowns, the portraits of delicate Victorian ladies. So graceful, so polished, so quietly dying. Their lips red from mercury, their cheeks glowing from inflammation, their skin pale from lead, their blood thin with arsenic. But still they danced, still they smiled, still they powdered one more layer and whispered, "Isn't she lovely?" Now pause. Think about how different our standards are today. We prize natural beauty, transparency, clean ingredients. But sometimes, not much has changed. We still chase ideals. We still believe in miracles in jars. We still equate appearance with worth. And though our products are safer, our fears are the same. Will they love me if I'm not beautiful? Will I matter if I'm plain? The Victorian woman knew the answer in her world. So she risked everything. For a moment in the candlelight, when the room turned quiet, and she looked perfect, even if, underneath, her skin was breaking. Ban Yuan Tip Tuc Voi Chuang 17. The price of men's grooming, razors, disease, and bloodied skin chew? Chuang Nais Ed Sao Veo Kuok Song Vi Sin Qua Dan Ong Loi Victoria, Tu Loi Dao Chia Se Trong Team Chao Cho Den Vim Nim Vi Kong He Ko Ku Trung. The price of men's grooming, razors, disease, and bloodied skin. Take a breath. And now imagine being a man in Victorian London. Each morning begins with ritual. Not prayer, but preparation. You stand in front of a chipped mirror, holding a razor blade, sharpened, bare, and ready. There is no safety guard, no disposable blade, no sanitary packaging. Just steel, your throat, and a steady hand. Shaving was an art, but it was also a gamble. Cut yourself too deeply, and it could fester. Nick the wrong spot, and you bleed for hours. Use a dull blade, and your skin peels like paper. So many men avoided it. Instead, they visited the barber. Now let's step into one. It's a small shop on a foggy London street. Inside, a chair, a sink, a strop hanging from a wooden peg. The air smells of sweat, tobacco, and old hair tonic. You sit. The barber approaches. He's already shaved 10 other men today. He does not sterilize the blade. He does not wash his hands. He wipes it once on a towel that's no longer white. And then he begins. The sound of steel gliding across skin. The scraping. The pulling. The moment of pain. It's quick. It's close. And it's unseen danger. Because that blade may still carry another man's blood. And in the age before germ theory, that meant infection, syphilis, sepsis. A man could walk out with a clean chin and a death sentence. Now breathe again. Even for those who shaved at home, it was no safer. Razors had to be honed by hand, using leather straps or stones. One slip in sharpening, and the edge turned jagged. One wrong motion, and you cut your lip, your ear, your cheek. And what did men use to soothe the burn? Alcohol-based tonic. Perfumed spirits. They burned. They stung. They covered the wound with scent, not protection. And let's not forget mustaches and sideburns. Symbols of masculinity, pride, status. These required waxes, often made from animal fat or coal tar. They were applied with fingers that had just been on coins, door handles, or chamber pots. No washing in between. And the result? Skin infections, folliculitis, boils, sometimes abscesses that had to be drained without anesthesia. Let your shoulders relax, because the dangers didn't stop with razors. Some barbers also offered medical treatments. They lanced boils, drained abscesses, pulled teeth, removed ingrown nails. No training, no antiseptic, no clean tools. The same hands that oiled your hair would cut into your flesh, and still men lined up, because looking presentable meant respect. A clean-shaven jaw meant employment. A groomed appearance meant honor, even if it meant blood. Now turn to the military. Soldiers were required to shave, often without mirrors, without warm water, sometimes even on horseback. The blades were issued, shared, returned, and many carried scars on their cheeks from rushed mornings. Take a moment now and touch your own face. Smooth, modern. But back then, even a shaving cut could end a life, because once it got infected, there were few options. Leeches, mercury. Barbers sometimes applied hot irons to cauterize infected spots. The smell of burning flesh was not rare in the grooming room, and yet they kept shaving, kept combing, kept hoping the next cut wouldn't be the last, because to go unshaven was seen as lazy, uncivilized, or mad. And in the Victorian world, reputation was survival. So they faced the blade every day with quiet bravery. Now breathe in slowly. And next time you use a modern razor, remember the men who came before you, who shaved without mirrors, without soap, without safety, and risked everything for a clean jawline. Hospital horrors, the filthy truth behind Victorian healthcare. Close your eyes and imagine this. You are sick. You have a fever, a wound that won't heal, a pain that won't stop. Your neighbors urge you to go to the hospital, but your family hesitates, because everyone knows people don't leave the hospital. They vanish into white sheets and return in black carts. Now open the creaking wooden door to a Victorian ward. The smell hits first. Sweat, blood. There is no disinfectant. There are no gloves. There is no concept of germs. You step into a large room with rows of metal beds, lined with men and women, groaning, coughing, dying. Doctors wear black coats, not because it's formal, but because it hides the stains. They move from one patient to the next, wiping their hands on the same apron, using the same saw, the same scalpel, the same needle. There is no sterilization, because germ theory hasn't caught on yet. Let your breath slow. Surgeries were done without anesthesia until the mid-century. Patients were held down by assistants, biting on leather straps, screaming until they passed out, even after chloroform arrived. It was poorly administered. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it stopped the heart. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came after. Let's say your surgery was successful. You'd be moved to a recovery bed, next to someone with gangrene, or open tuberculosis, or a surgical wound full of pus and flies. You might have survived the knife, but you wouldn't survive the hospital. Infection was rampant. No antiseptics, no hand washing, no fresh sheets. Patients were washed only if family did it. Latrines were shared. Rats ran beneath the cots. Sometimes amputated limbs piled up outside, waiting to be carted away. Let your shoulders drop. And consider this. Nurses were few, poorly trained, or overworked. Florence Nightingale was one of the first to introduce cleaning protocols, but even she faced ridicule. Doctors believed in miasma, bad air, not bacteria. So they opened windows, but left wounds uncovered. They burned incense, but reused bandages soaked with blood. Hospital infections, like childbed fever or sepsis, killed more than the original injuries. One doctor might deliver a baby, then go amputate a leg, then drain a boil, all without changing clothes. And so death lingered in the halls. It waited in the corners. It whispered through fevered lips. Now take a slow breath. Let's not forget the asylums, where mental illness was misunderstood and mistreated. The hospitals, for the mad, were cold, overcrowded, violent. Patients were restrained, beaten, bled, shocked, drowned. All in the name of curing a mind that doctors never tried to understand. And the children, the children. Sick children were often treated with calomel, a mercury compound, laudanum, an opiate, bleeding and blistering. If they cried too much, they were sedated. If they didn't cry, they were ignored. Now pause, because here's what's haunting. People feared hospitals, but they still went, because staying home meant dying slowly. Hospitals meant dying fast, or if lucky, surviving by a thread. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone got better. They went home with scars, with stories, with new respect for life. And those rare survivors became legends in their neighborhoods. Old Thomas made it through the hospital, they'd say. God must like him. Now breathe, and think of your own hospital. Clean sheets, single-use gloves, sterilized tools, monitors, medication, and the belief that you'll leave healthier than when you came in. For Victorians, that belief didn't exist. To them, the hospital was a last resort, a half step from the grave, and most often, a place where the sick were simply made sicker. Waste and water, the struggle for sanitation before the sewer revolution. Take a moment. Imagine waking up in your narrow Victorian flat. It's early. The sun hasn't yet burned through the fog. You stretch. You reach for a drink of water, but you hesitate because you know the water might kill you. Let your breath slow. Before modern plumbing, before flushing toilets, before treatment plants, water was a weapon, and waste was everywhere. Let's start with the simplest act, relieving yourself. If you were wealthy, you might have a water closet, an early toilet. But where did it drain? Not far. Often straight into a brick-lined cesspit beneath the house. A pit that filled, festered, and leaked. You'd smell it through the floorboards. You'd feel it in the damp. You'd pray it didn't overflow. If you were poor, you used a chamber pot, a ceramic bowl kept beneath the bed. You'd use it at night, then empty it in the morning, sometimes into a shared backyard pit, sometimes into the street gutter, sometimes, if you were tired or careless, out the window. Garde-le, they'd shout in old Edinburgh. It meant look out. Seconds before urine and feces rained from above. Now pause, and imagine the streets. Narrow, cobbled, worn down by cartwheels and human feet, and lined with gutters carrying refuse, offal, and sewage. Children played beside them. Dogs drank from them. And when it rained, it all rose. It was swirled and flooded into homes. Let your shoulders drop. The River Thames, once a source of beauty and pride, became a churning ribbon of filth. By the 1850s, it carried human waste, dead animals, chemical runoff from tanneries and slaughterhouses, corpses of dogs, pigs, and sometimes people. Its waters turned brown, then black, and the stench was so powerful that Parliament suspended meetings during the Great Stink of 1858. But the real danger wasn't the smell. It was what lived in the water. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, invisible enemies that crept from cups and cooking pots into the bellies of the unsuspecting. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out in weeks. Whole families died from the same kettle of tea. Because no one knew the truth. They blamed bad air. They thought the smell was the killer, not the water. Now breathe again. It took one man to change everything. Dr. John Snow, a physician with stubborn conviction, investigated a cholera outbreak in Soho. He traced every case, mapped every death, and found the source: a single public water pump on Broad Street. He removed the handle, and the death stopped. It was the beginning of a revolution. But it wasn't instant. The cities still overflowed. The cesspits still burst. The night soil men still hauled waste by moonlight, until a man named Joseph Bazalgette took up the challenge. He designed London's modern sewer system. Over 1,100 miles of tunnels and pipes, beneath a city of millions. They dug up streets, relocated neighborhoods, moved rivers, and for the first time, waste left the city instead of flooding it. Let your breath settle. The change was profound. Cholera deaths dropped. Typhoid receded. Children began to live beyond infancy. And for the first time in centuries, water became safe. But only in the city. In the countryside, and in the poorest districts, people still drank from streams that shared space with pigs. Still bathed in water drawn from wells near outhouses. And still died. Quietly, quickly, and forgotten. So the sewer revolution wasn't just engineering. It was justice. It was survival. It was the belief that even the poor deserved a clean drink. Now take a final breath. Next time you fill a glass at your tap, remember the river of waste that once flowed where clean water now runs. And give silent thanks. For every brick laid in darkness, every tunnel dug in stench, every pipe that turned death into life. The mental toll of dirt, how hygiene shaped Victorian psychology. Let's not talk about filth anymore. Let's talk about shame. Because in Victorian England, being dirty wasn't just inconvenient. It was a moral failure. Take a breath. Let it settle in your chest. You see, cleanliness meant more than hygiene. It meant decency, respectability, control. If your hands were dirty, people assumed your soul was too. So imagine living in poverty, surrounded by mud, with no running water, no soap, no laundry, and yet being judged for your smell. Your neighbors looked down on you. Landlords refused to rent to you. Employers wouldn't hire you. And even charities demanded you be clean before they gave you help. Let that irony settle in. You couldn't afford coal for hot water, couldn't pay for laundry soap, couldn't leave your job to bathe. And yet society whispered, if you're dirty, it's your fault. This was internalized. People began to believe that dirt was a sign of sin. Children felt unworthy because their shirts were stained. Mothers scrubbed their floors obsessively, not to make them clean, but to make themselves good. Now let your shoulders drop. The pressure was immense. A respectable woman couldn't let her undergarments be seen drying. She hid them under beds, behind stoves, in attics dark with soot, not to be discreet, but to avoid social exile. Because even clean things, if seen, could be considered shameful. And that shame led to obsession. People washed their faces multiple times a day, even if they hadn't bathed their bodies in weeks. They powdered their wigs, perfumed their rooms, scrubbed their teeth with salt and soot, just to feel human. And if they failed, they didn't just feel dirty. They felt unworthy of love. Let that sink in. Doctors of the time wrote of women who refused to eat because their clothes were unclean. Men who suffered nervous breakdowns after losing access to clean water. Children who became withdrawn and silent after classmates mocked their smell. This wasn't vanity. It was a form of psychological survival. Now close your eyes for a moment. Picture a young maid, up before dawn, hands raw from lye, scrubbing her mistress's sheets, while hiding the fact she hasn't bathed in a week. She cleans to prove her value. She hides her smell to keep her job. She lowers her voice to avoid shame. This mental toll crossed classes. Even the wealthy felt it, in their obsession with perfumes, bleached linens, and spotless silver. The fear of dirt became a fear of losing status. And so hygiene became hierarchy. Let your breath deepen. As the 19th century ended, and public health improved, many people still held on to that shame. Even after germ theory, even after sewers, even after soap became cheap and available, because the belief had sunk into the bones. Cleanliness is next to godliness, they said. And for Victorians, that wasn't metaphor. It was a sentence. Now pause and think about your own rituals. Washing your hands before meals, changing clothes before bed, feeling embarrassed if you smell after the gym. Much of it is practical, but some of it is legacy. A legacy passed down through generations, from mothers who were shamed, to daughters who were silent, to sons who scrubbed behind their ears not for health, but for worthiness. Now take one final breath, and let this truth settle in. Victorian hygiene wasn't just about dirt. It was about dignity, about proving that you deserved your place in the world, about fighting every day against the invisible stain of poverty and the loud judgment of society. And that fight left scars you couldn't always wash away. The silent triumph, what we take for granted. Take a moment. Feel the air in your lungs. It's clean. It carries no rot, no coal soot, no rising stench of human waste. Just air, simple, invisible, safe. That alone would have seemed like a miracle to a Victorian. Let your breath settle. Now think of where you're sitting. A room with a ceiling, walls without mold, a floor you don't have to scrub with lye. No rats chewing under your bed. No cold bowl of gray water to splash on your face. There is water. You can drink it, bathe in it, flush with it, and it won't kill you. You don't have to beg a neighbor. You don't have to walk miles. You don't have to hope it rained. You just turn a handle. Now pause and listen. No clatter of horse hooves in the mud. No shout of "Gardaloo" from a window above. No coughing child next door succumbing to waterborne disease. No shame for the dirt you couldn't afford to wash off. No judgment for the clothes you couldn't clean. No silence from neighbors who held their breath around you. Just you. Unaware of how rare that used to be. Let your shoulders drop. It's easy to forget. The pipes beneath your home. The filters in your faucet. The soap at your sink. The porcelain throne you barely glance at. Each is a monument to the battles others fought. To the women who scrubbed until their skin cracked. To the men who dug sewers through death and rot. To the children who died before anyone knew what cholera meant. To the doctors mocked for saying, "Wash your hands." And to the engineers who drew maps in candlelight, built brick tunnels under cities, and gave us the right to forget what filth feels like. Now breathe, because the greatest gift modern hygiene gave us was the absence of fear. No one teaches you to be thankful for soap, or for a warm bath, or for the fact that your home doesn't smell like yesterday's waste. But you should be. You should be grateful for every silent miracle that hides behind your walls. And when you lie down to sleep tonight, on clean sheets, in a room with airflow, without the buzz of flies or the reek of sewage, let a quiet thanks pass through your chest. Not to a person, but to progress. Because the war against dirt was not just a battle for comfort. It was a war for dignity, for life. And the fact that you don't have to fight it anymore, that's the quietest triumph of all.